Online dating is now part of our social landscape, and many people meet their significant others this way. But there is a fair degree of residual embarrassment suggesting that many people wish it was not so. But one of the huge demographic of people using sites littered with fake profiles and narcissists is the lonely, the downtrodden, and those lacking self-esteem. Their vulnerability is normally plain to see, and it is a beacon to those who seek to manipulate them and do them harm. And this is shown very clearly in today's terrible tale. Peter Fasoli was an older gentleman, a gay computer repairman who was lonely and was desperately seeking company. But the company he found would quite literally be the death of him. So this is the case of Peter Fasoli, and this is Murder of Crows. In January 2013, a man died in what appeared to be an accidental house fire through what was to all appearances like smoke inhalation, or at worst a sex game gone wrong. The man was a loner, 58-year-old Peter Fasoli, and those that knew him mourned the passing of a sweet but quiet man. Looking at his life, he was very isolated and did not have a large circle of friends. His loneliness made him quite vulnerable, but he kept himself to himself. But as relatives picked apart the bungalow where Peter had lost his life some 2 years after it was determined to be accidental, they made a discovery that turned the case on its head. On the hard drive of the computer repairman's PC, a relative found a 7-hour webcam video that detailed exactly what happened in the hours leading to his death. And it was a terrifying story. Whether Peter had deliberately been recording as a safety measure, or just happened to accidentally start the recording, either way, the police now had a complete record of what had happened. The harrowing footage was found by Peter's nephew, Christopher Murgatroyd, who was looking through his uncle's fire-damaged computer in November of 2014 as part of research into his family tree. Now, Peter had been active on the dating site Badoo. It's complete shit, by the way. Don't bother. Anywho, Peter connected with a much younger man, 28-year-old Jason Marshall. And it would appear that Peter invited the man to his flat with plans for a bondage sex session. It's hard to believe that the young man would not have had an ulterior motive. And this may be why Peter had started recording the meeting, where the camera was set up to show the living area. And it would be within this living area that the initial interaction between Peter and Jason occurred. And it seemed to take the form of a role play, with the younger man taking on the persona of an MI5 agent, complete with a really crappy lanyard, with him having to detain Peter. But it's after this that things take a turn from consensual to decidedly non-consensual, with Peter even begging for help. What happens after this is horrific, with Peter being beaten and suffocated by having his head wrapped with cling film. Only parts of the CCTV have been released for obvious reasons of privacy and decency. But here is the footage that I was able to find. Towards the end of the ordeal, with Peter likely dead by this point, Marshall takes time out to have a calm and unrushed cigarette, and Marshall ultimately nudges the webcam, which stops the video recording. However, the audio continues to document the chilling events of that day. As well as seeming to enjoy torturing the older man, a secondary motive became evident when it was seen that Marshall had taken Peter's cash and cards from his wallet and took out £780 from the lonely man's account, as well as buying a flight to Italy. But rather than going to ground, it seems that Marshall had developed a taste for crime, and he believed he had found a winning and faultless modus operandi. Less than 3 weeks after Peter Fasoli died, Marshall killed Vincenzo Iale, who was 67, using an electrical flex in his flat in Rome. On the 3rd of February, just over a week later, he contacted Umberto Gismondi on a gay dating site, and they arranged to meet for sex at the 54-year-old's flat. While there, Marshall, who pretended to be working at the British Embassy, bound, gagged and attacked Mr. Gismondi with the truncheon and pepper spray he had brought with him. He then demanded money and tried to smother him with a cushion, but he fled when Mr. Gismondi alerted his neighbours. Marshall was later arrested and found guilty of murder and attempted murder in July of 2014. British police spoke to their Italian counterparts, and Marshall was flown to Heathrow Airport in custody in February, where he was arrested on suspicion of murdering Peter Fasoli. And it would be at the trial at the Old Bailey in London in 2017 that some of the twisted minutiae of the events of that night would be laid bare. Jason Marshall, 28 at the time, calmly stood over the body of Peter Fasoli after he was dead and pronounced, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost," in Latin. What a pretentious cockwomble. He bound and gagged Peter Fasoli during a role-play game in which he accused him of hacking into a government laptop and injected him with drugs. So the jury at the Old Bailey was told. Peter Fasoli shouted, "No, no, please," before Marshall wrapped cling film round his face and a carrier bag round his head. Shocking footage with classic FM playing pieces by Wagner and Mendelssohn in the background was shown to the jurors. As we've seen a snippet of, the video showed Marshall dressed as a policeman with a utility belt, apparently suffocating Fasoli, then tidying the scene and calmly smoking a cigarette. Marshall entered Peter Fasoli's home at 7 p.m. on January the 6th, 2013, and told him that they could not have a threesome as promised. But Marshall went on to say, "I thought I'd come and spend some time with you anyway. I missed you." In the meeting, Peter Fasoli explained that he repaired laptops, while Marshall posed as a policeman or MI5 agent or some bullshit, and said that he sometimes had to have sex undercover. They started speaking about who Fasoli may have mended a laptop for, and whether it was a government one. Ed Brown, QC prosecuting, said, "It was this platform that the defendant soon used to accuse the deceased of helping a terrorist, for which he would be detained." Marshall suggested that the victim should take his clothes off, then told him he was arrested for being a spy under the Espionage Act of 1946. He tied Peter up using rope and handcuffs and stripped him naked. At this point, Peter Fasoli was happy to go along with it, thinking it was just a sex game. But wearing latex gloves, Marshall carried out an interrogation and gagged the victim. But by 8:20 p.m, Peter Fasoli was not enjoying the role play, and he was heard to say, "Seriously, I've not done anything," and he asks if he can get dressed. But instead, Marshall clamps Peter Fasoli's right nipple and then burnt his chest with a lit cigarette. Fasoli asks at one point, "Seriously, I want to know what's going on." With Fasoli by this point possibly even starting to believe that he really had been arrested, and he asks Marshall if he can be taken to the police station. But Marshall told him, "I like to do my own investigation before I hand it over to the police." Before injecting his arm with a syringe full of truth serum, with Marshall saying after administering the injection, "You're a bleeder, aren't you?" He asked Peter Fasoli to give his personal details and financial information, and threatened him with a little jolt from a taser. Marshall demanded Peter's PIN numbers and was given 2, but accused Peter of lying and drew a hunting knife from his belt and pressed the blade against Peter's neck and face. He told Peter that he was going to give him something to put you to sleep while I go to the cash machine. And this drug was the antipsychotic sedative haloperidol, which he injected into Peter Fasoli's buttock. Marshall reapplied the gag and left for approximately 20 minutes, before returning and demanding passwords for various websites and apps. By about 10:30 p.m, he had removed the handcuffs before injecting Peter's arms 3 further times and loudly saying "suspect detained," apparently into a personal radio in some kind of inner fantasy that he must have been having. Marshall told him he needed to be unconscious before going to the police station, before clamping his hand over Peter's mouth and nose. Peter managed to get to his feet after a struggle, but was thrown back onto the bed, and a pillow was pressed down on his face while he screamed and struggled. Marshall left the room and returned with the cling film, causing Peter to shout out in panic. But it was wrapped around his head. Marshall then placed a plastic carrier bag on Fasoli's head. Peter Fasoli initially squeals, but then falls silent as Marshall holds the plastic bag in place. Fasoli could be heard gurgling, and Marshall pretended to speak into his radio, asking for an ambulance. Over the next few minutes, he did nothing as Fasoli struggled for breath, telling him, "Pete, if you want an ambulance, you'll have to let me know." Marshall slowly unrolled more cling film and appeared to lean down with it to Fasoli's face. He then stood up and kicked Peter for a reaction, but the sound of breathing had stopped by this point. It must have been a horrifying case for the jury to have to actually witness the video happening in real time. But on the 26th of September 2017, Jason Marshall was found guilty of murder and was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 39 years. The severity of the sentence reflecting the sadistic and cruel nature of the torture and murder. Sentencing Marshall, who was found guilty of murder and also arson at the Old Bailey, Nicholas Hilliard, QC, said, "I am sure you were motivated by a desire to cause Mr. Fasoli pain without his consent. You tortured him for so long because you enjoyed it so much. The dominant elements of your motivation for killing Mr. Fasoli were robbery and sadism. I'm sure that you can have felt no remorse whatsoever for what you have done. On the contrary, you derived pleasure from it. In 2019, a fresh inquest was ordered into the death of Peter Fasoli, who was wrongly found to have died accidentally in the initial inquest before the video footage of his murder came to light. Following an inquest into Mr. Fasoli's death, held at West London Coroner's Court in 2013, a verdict of accidental death was recorded. But at the High Court in London in 2019, two senior judges quashed the original verdict and ordered that a new inquest must take place after the video footage of Mr. Fasoli's killing was recovered, leading to Marshall's conviction. Lawyers acting on behalf of the senior coroner for West London applied to quash the original verdict so that a fresh inquest could be carried out. Lord Justice Hickinbottom, sitting with Mrs. Justice Lambert, said the case concerned quite extraordinary facts. Giving a brief ruling, the judge said that the fire brigade were called to reports of a fire in Northolt on January the 7th, 2013. Peter Fasoli was found unresponsive and taken to hospital, but was pronounced dead on arrival. The judge said that no evidence of an assault or a restraint by a third party was found in a post-mortem examination, and that a report from the London Fire Brigade concluded that the fire was likely accidentally caused by an LED bulb falling onto bedding. But, he said, police reinvestigated the circumstances surrounding Mr. Fasoli's death after the video footage of his killing was recovered, ultimately leading to Marshall's conviction. In all the circumstances, it is clearly necessary and desirable, in the interests of justice, that a fresh inquest and investigation should take place, the judge concluded. The trial judge at the Old Bailey said that Marshall, who was by then serving 16 years for the attacks that he committed in Italy, felt no remorse whatsoever for the killing. Judge Nicholas Hilliard QC also raised concerns that the police failed to detect the murder of Mr. Fasoli for nearly 2 years, and that was only after a chance finding by Peter's nephew. The judge said that social media records showed that Marshall was coming to Peter Fasoli's home on the evening of the murder, and that Mr. Fasoli's bank card was used after his death. He added that he wanted to express the hope that someone who is in a position to do so, so far as the Met Police is concerned, will look at whether procedures for investigations are sufficiently comprehensive and robust in such circumstances. And that was the terrible case of a man who seemingly wanted to become a serial killer. And in order to do so, he preyed on vulnerable men who believed his bullshit and would be less likely able to fight him off. He is a cockwomble of the highest order and should rightly be left to rot. So our thoughts turn to Peter Fasoli, a quiet man who kept himself to himself. He was desperately lonely, and this was preyed upon, with Jason Marshall, at least initially, successfully disguising the death as misadventure, and the truth only being revealed 2 years later, when a relative happened to be going through Peter's fire-damaged computer. Had he not done so, there is every chance that Marshall would have got away with the murder of a sweet, mild-mannered computer repairman. This video is, of course, dedicated to Peter Fasoli, and I hope that wherever he is now, that he's no longer lonely. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. I'm Steve. Samson is flat out on the floor just here in front of me, but you can't see him. You coming to say hello? Oh, but goodbye, as the case may be. You coming up? Coming up? Come on then. Come on then, if you come in, thank you. Yes, I'm Steve. This is Samson, who sometimes can be asked, which is a surprise. And we will see you when we see you.
Say